Now we will look at conversational settings. We have, broadly speaking, two types of settings. One is personal and the other one is institutional. When we have personal settings, that is a setting where there's an exchange of ideas or sharing of ideas in a very informal and a free manner, and there are no explicit rules which are required to have the exchange of conversation. In personal setting, that comprises of your family members, your friends, close friends. Institutional setting is considered to be more formal setting which requires formal conversation where the participants can be your colleagues at workplace, your boss, your subordinates. So the conversation that takes place in a personal setting is different from a conversation that takes place at the institutional level or in a formal setting. Institutional setting includes participants who are engaged in speech exchange that resembles ordinary conversation but are limited by institutional rules. So you have the institutional rules that determine this kind of conversation which takes place in the institutional setting. In personal setting, you do not have very explicit rules, and it is basically that conversation is based on the mutual understanding and on the shared common grounds that people share or that people or participants are aware of. Let's discuss the personal setting as well as the institutional setting, and with regard to this, the important area which covers these two types of settings is what is known as conversational analysis, which is CA. So let's see how CA takes care of the understanding of personal as well as the institutional settings. So as we have just discussed that personal settings is free exchange of turns, and turns may be used to exchange gossip, conduct business, or do any number of things. So personal settings of conversation is there in daily life routine, and it is there in terms of getting things done through certain mutual understanding and mutual sharing of ideas. Looking at the institutional setting, an institutional discourse is the one in which one participant, it could be a judge, teacher, physician, and so forth, is considered the authority figure. So in institutional discourse, all focus in such a setting is directed towards the institutional authority. Mostly goals are directed towards that, and the aim is to have this call for action kind of approach. Institutional interaction, by contrast, generally involves a reduction in the range of interactional practices deployed by the participants. That is what Drew and Heritage believes, that restrictions in the context they can be deployed in, and it frequently involves some specialization and re-specification of the instructional relevance of the practices and remain. Institutional talk focuses on more restricted environment in which the goals of the participants are more limited and institutional specific. Second, there are restrictions on the nature of interactional contribution, and they are often enforced. Third is institution and activity specific inferential frameworks are common. So these are the understanding which Drew and Heritage have provided with regard to an institutional discourse. This leads us to conversational analysis, which is an approach to the study of social interaction, embracing both verbal and non-verbal conduct in situations of everyday life. Conversations are structured by cognitive and social variables and rules governing the what and how of our contributions. Social rules are the ones that we are aware of, and they are cultural specific in terms of how you address your speaker, and that depends on the role of the participants, the role of the speakers in a conversation, whether you are adopting a formal way of conversing with the people who are in the process of conversation, whether it's informal, are you being rude or polite, all these comes under your social role. And with regard to cognitive rules, they are the ones which facilitate the determining of appropriate linguistic form to be used in a particular social setting. The choice of words, that is what is there when your cognition or your cognitive processes, they must take into account. So we see that conversation analysis deals with these, and according to Seed House, conversational analysis is the investigation of how participants analyze and interpret each other's actions and develop a shared understanding. Conversation analyst observes conversation as an action, not just a communication. That is what has been proposed by Smith. Therefore, the analysis focuses on how people understand and respond to one another. There are more facts which are also related to conversation analysis, and some of them are: the length of conversation is not fixed and it cannot be specified in advance. What the parties are going to say, again, it is something which is not fixed and cannot be specified in advance. Reason is some specification, tentative specification can be determined, but again, the flow of the conversation can be different when the actual conversation takes place. Relative distribution of turns, again, is not fixed and it is difficult to sort of determine in advance. Number of parties can also change, and conversation can be continuous or discontinuous. So all these factors come under the conversation analysis. To conclude, conversation also varies with social settings. Speech in institutional settings adhere to rules other than those typically found in personal settings. So personal settings as well as the institutional settings, they are different with regard to the conversational practices.